They called her Hideous, but beneath the weathered surface lived a beauty that would transform everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty platform as Marianne clutched her worn carpetbag, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The train's whistle echoed through the Colorado mountain valley, a lonesome sound that matched the ache in her chest. She had traveled 3 days to reach this remote frontier town, carrying nothing but hope and a letter from a man who claimed he needed a wife. The autumn wind caught strands of her brown hair, pulling them loose from the careful bun she had pinned that morning with trembling fingers. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger. Thanks, and let's get back to the story. Marianne pressed her lips together, tasting the dust that seemed to coat everything in this wild country. 23 years of cruel words had taught her to expect disappointment, but somewhere deep inside, a small flame of hope refused to die. The orphanage had been her world until 3 months ago, when she finally aged out of their care with nothing but the clothes on her back and a face the other children had mocked since childhood. A birthmark spread across her left cheek like spilled wine, and her eyes sat too close together, or so she had been told countless times. But Thomas Henderson had written kind letters, speaking of loneliness and his need for companionship on his cattle ranch. He had never asked for her photograph, which gave her courage to believe that perhaps, finally, someone might see past her flaws. The depot was little more than a wooden platform with a small shelter, surrounded by mountains that rose like cathedral walls toward a sky so blue it hurt to look at. A handful of people waited nearby, their faces weathered by sun and wind, their clothes practical and worn. Marianne searched their faces, looking for the man who had described himself as tall with graying hair and kind eyes. Her stomach twisted with nervous energy as she spotted a figure approaching, his stride confident and purposeful. Thomas Henderson was indeed tall, with silver threading through his dark hair, but the kindness she had hoped to see in his eyes was nowhere to be found. Instead, his face hardened the moment his gaze fell on her, his step faltering as if he had walked into an invisible wall. The silence stretched between them like a chasm, filled only by the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the pines. "You must be Marianne," he said finally, his voice flat and cold as winter stone. His eyes swept over her face, lingering on the birthmark that had marked her as different since birth. She watched his expression change from disappointment to something that looked almost like disgust, and her heart began to crack like ice in the spring thaw. "Yes, sir," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I received your letters, and I came as quickly as I could arrange passage." She held out her hand, hoping for some warmth, some sign that the man who had written such gentle words still existed somewhere behind those harsh eyes. He did not take her hand. Instead, he stepped back as if she carried some contagious disease. "There has been a mistake," he said, his words sharp as broken glass. "I cannot marry you. The arrangement is off." He turned away, already dismissing her as if she were nothing more than an unwanted package that had been delivered to the wrong address. The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. She had known this moment might come, had prepared herself for rejection, but the reality was worse than her darkest fears. The other people on the platform had begun to stare, some with pity, others with the cruel curiosity that followed her wherever she went. Heat flooded her cheeks, and she wished the earth would open and swallow her whole. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I have nowhere else to go. Perhaps we could simply talk, get to know each other better." But Thomas was already walking away, his boots striking the wooden planks with finality. She was alone again, more alone than she had ever been, stranded in a place where she knew no one and had no money for return passage. "That was poorly done, Henderson." The voice came from behind her, deep and steady as a mountain stream. Marianne turned to see a man emerging from the shadows of the depot building, his face partially hidden beneath the brim of a worn hat. He was tall, but not as tall as Thomas, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard work and hands that looked gentle despite their obvious strength. Something in his posture suggested he had been watching the entire exchange, and she felt a fresh wave of shame wash over her. Thomas paused in his retreat, his jaw tightening. "This is not your concern, Jake Morrison. Mind your own business." Jake stepped into the sunlight, and Marianne caught her first clear look at his face. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. A scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, but it did not make him look frightening. Instead, it gave his face character, as if he had lived through something difficult and emerged stronger for it. When he looked at her, she saw none of the revulsion that had filled Thomas's expression. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like understanding. When a man makes promises to a woman and brings her across half the country based on those promises, it becomes everyone's concern, Jake said quietly. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, but there was no anger in it, only disappointment. Especially when that man lacks the basic decency to honor his word. Thomas's face flushed red above his collar. "I never promised anything to someone who looks like that. I expected a wife, not a freak show." The words hung in the air like poison, and Marianne felt something inside her shrivel and die. She had heard similar words all her life, but they had never cut so deep as they did in this moment, spoken in front of strangers in a place where she had hoped to find acceptance. The change in Jake was subtle but unmistakable. His posture shifted, and suddenly he seemed larger, more dangerous. You will apologize to the lady, he said, his voice still quiet but now carrying an edge that made the air itself seem to vibrate with tension. And then you will offer to pay her return passage to wherever she came from. I will do no such thing. Thomas sputtered, but he took an involuntary step backward. She misrepresented herself in her letters. I have every right to refuse marriage to someone who is clearly unsuitable. Unsuitable for what? Jake asked, moving closer. For sharing a home with a man who judges worth by the surface of things? For wasting her kindness on someone too shallow to recognize a gift when it is offered? I would say she is the one who is too good for what is being offered here. Marianne stared at him in shock. No one had ever defended her before, had ever suggested that she might be worth defending. The orphanage had taught her to be grateful for scraps of kindness, to accept cruelty as her due because of her appearance. But this stranger was standing up for her, as if she mattered, as if she had value beyond what others could see. Thomas looked between them, his face cycling through anger, embarrassment, and something that might have been fear. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small roll of bills. He threw them at Marianne's feet without looking at her. There. Enough for train fare back to wherever you came from. We are done here. He stalked away toward a waiting wagon, his back rigid with wounded pride. Marianne stared down at the money scattered in the dust around her feet, too stunned to move. The bills fluttered in the mountain breeze like fallen leaves, and she felt as worthless as the dirt they had landed on. This was how her great adventure ended, not with love or acceptance, but with money thrown at her feet like payment to a beggar. Jake knelt beside her and gathered up the bills, brushing the dust from each one with careful attention. When he stood, he held them out to her with the same respect he might show a lady in a fine drawing room. It is not charity when it is owed to you, he said gently. And it is not failure when you tried to do something good and encountered someone too blind to see it. She took the money with hands that shook, unable to meet his eyes. Thank you, she whispered. You did not have to do that. I am accustomed to such treatment. Well, you should not be, he said with quiet conviction. No one should become accustomed to cruelty. He studied her face for a moment, and she braced herself for the familiar look of pity or disgust. Instead, she saw something that looked like respect. My name is Jake Morrison. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town. It is not much, but it is peaceful, and there is always room for someone who needs a place to rest and decide what comes next. The offer was so unexpected that she almost laughed. You do not even know me, she said. How can you trust a complete stranger? Because I watched you stand there and take that man's cruelty without striking back or saying a harsh word in return, Jake replied. Because you asked for a chance to talk instead of demanding what you were promised. Because when someone threw money at your feet, you looked ashamed instead of angry. He adjusted his hat, suddenly seeming almost shy. Those things tell me more about your character than your face ever could. Marianne felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness this time. When was the last time someone had seen something good in her, something worth protecting? I have no money to pay you for room and board, she said honestly. And I cannot promise that your neighbors will not talk if you take in a woman like me. I am not much concerned with what my neighbors think, Jake said with a slight smile that transformed his entire face. And as for payment, well, a ranch always has work that needs doing. If you are willing to earn your keep, we can sort out the details as we go. He gestured toward a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient horses. What do you say? Will you let me offer you the hospitality that should have been yours from the start? She looked around the depot platform, at the mountains rising on all sides, at the endless sky that seemed to promise both freedom and uncertainty. Behind her lay everything she had ever known, a life of limitation and cruelty. Ahead lay the unknown, represented by a scarred man with kind eyes who had defended her honor when no one else would. Yes, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Yes, I will come with you. The ride to Jake's ranch took them through country that seemed carved from dreams and painted with light. Golden aspens shimmered in the afternoon sun, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. The road wound through valleys where cattle grazed beside crystal streams, and everywhere she looked, Marianne saw beauty that made her chest tight with emotion she could not name. She had never imagined that such places existed in the world, wild and free and untamed by human judgment. Jake drove with easy competence, his hands gentle on the reins, his attention split between the road ahead and the woman beside him. He did not try to fill the silence with empty chatter, and she was grateful for that. The quiet between them felt comfortable rather than awkward, as if they had known each other far longer than an hour. Have you lived here long? She finally asked as they crested a hill that revealed a vista of rolling meadows dotted with livestock. About 8 years, he replied. I came west after the war, looking for something I could not find back east. This land called to me, I suppose. It does not judge a man by his past or his scars. It only cares about whether he is willing to work hard and treat it with respect. She heard something in his voice that echoed her own experience, a hint of someone who had known rejection and found peace in solitude. Were you in the war? She asked softly. He nodded, one hand unconsciously touching the scar on his face. Confederate cavalry. Took a saber cut at Gettysburg that ended my fighting days. Spent months in a Union hospital, then longer trying to figure out what to do with myself in a world that had changed beyond recognition. Is that where you learn not to judge people by their appearance? The question slipped out before she could stop it, and she immediately regretted her boldness. But Jake smiled, a real smile this time that reached his eyes. That and a few other hard lessons along the way. Scars teach you things about what matters and what does not. They also teach you to recognize the difference between surface damage and true ugliness. Trust me when I say that what Thomas Henderson showed today was far uglier than anything that could be seen on the outside. They turned onto a smaller track that led through a grove of pines, their branches creating a cathedral of green shadow and golden light. The scent of resin and wood smoke filled the air, and Marian felt something inside her chest begin to uncoil for the first time in years. This was what peace felt like, she realized. This was what it meant to breathe without fear of mockery or rejection. The ranch house came into view as they rounded a bend, and Marian caught her breath. It was not large or grand, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Built of golden logs with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides, it seemed to have grown from the landscape itself. Flowers bloomed in neat beds beside the steps, and a vegetable garden stretched along the south side, heavy with the last harvest of the season. Chickens scratched in a fenced yard, and horses grazed in a nearby pasture, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it. The house looked like a home, not just a shelter, but a place where someone had invested time and care in creating something lasting and good. "It suits me," Jake said simply. Simple, sturdy, and far enough from town that a man can think his own thoughts without interference. He brought the wagon to a stop beside the porch and climbed down, then came around to help her descend. His hand was warm and steady as he assisted her, and she noticed that he was careful not to make her feel awkward about accepting help. The porch boards were smooth beneath her feet, worn by weather and used but solid and welcoming. Jake opened the front door and gestured for her to precede him, and she stepped into a room that felt immediately like sanctuary. The main room was spacious but cozy, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and windows that looked out onto the mountains. The furniture was handmade but well-crafted, and everything was clean and orderly without feeling cold or unwelcoming. "The guest room is through there," Jake said, pointing to a door off the main room. "It has its own window and a good bed. You can stay as long as you need to decide what you want to do next. No pressure, no expectations beyond helping out around the place if you are able and willing." Marianne walked to the window and looked out at the view of mountains and meadows stretching to the horizon. For the first time in her life, she was in a place where no one knew her history, where she was not defined by the cruelty of others or the mark on her face. She was simply a person in need of kindness, and kindness had been freely offered. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, turning to face him. "You could have walked away at the depot. Most people would have. Why did you get involved?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. "I suppose because I know what it feels like to be judged by something you cannot control," he said finally. "And because I was raised to believe that when you see someone being treated badly, you have a choice. You can walk away and tell yourself it is not your problem, or you can step up and do what is right. My mother would have taken a switch to me if I had walked away from what happened today." She sounds like a wise woman. She was. She taught me that a person's worth is not determined by what they look like or where they come from, but by how they treat others when no one is watching. He moved to the fireplace and began building a fire, his movements economical and practiced. "She also taught me to cook, which means you will not starve while you are here, though I cannot promise anything fancy." As if summoned by his words, her stomach growled audibly, reminding her that she had been too nervous to eat much during her journey. Heat flooded her cheeks, but Jake only grinned. "I will take that as a request for dinner," he said. "Why do not you get settled, and I will see what I can put together. We eat simple here, but there is always plenty." The guest room was small but perfect, with a bed covered in a quilt that looked handmade and a washstand with a pitcher and basin. Marianne sat on the edge of the bed and looked around at what was, temporarily at least, her room. For the first time since leaving the orphanage, she had a space that was hers alone, a place where she could close the door and simply be herself without fear of judgment. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her spare dress in the small wardrobe and placing her brush and few personal items on the washstand. The room smelled of lavender and sunshine, and the window looked out onto a meadow where horses grazed in the golden evening light. It was more beautiful than anywhere she had ever lived, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to stay here permanently, to call this place home. But she pushed the thought away. Jake Morrison was a good man who had offered temporary shelter to someone in need. She could not mistake his kindness for something more, could not allow herself to hope for permanence in a place that was only meant to be a brief stopping point. She had learned long ago that hoping for too much only led to greater disappointment. The smell of cooking food drew her back to the main room, where Jake was working at the stove with the easy competence of someone who had been cooking for himself for years. He had changed from his good clothes into work pants and a simple shirt, and she could see the strength in his shoulders as he moved around the kitchen area. "Can I help with anything?" she asked, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "You can set the table if you like," he said without turning around. "Plates are in that cupboard there, and the silverware is in the drawer underneath." It felt good to have a task, something useful to do with her hands. She found the dishes and set 2 places at the small table near the window, arranging everything carefully. It had been years since she had set a table for 2 people who would share a meal as equals, and the simple act felt somehow significant. "Beef stew and biscuits," Jake announced, carrying over a pot that smelled of herbs and comfort. "Nothing fancy, but it will fill the empty spaces." The stew was delicious, rich with vegetables from his garden and beef that had been slow-cooked until it fell apart at the touch of a fork. The biscuits were light and fluffy, and Marianne found herself eating with an appetite she had not felt in months. Partly it was the good food, but mostly it was the absence of tension, the relief of sitting across from someone who was not studying her face for flaws or reasons to mock. "This is wonderful," she said honestly. "You were being modest about your cooking skills." "My mother made sure I could take care of myself," Jake replied. "She said a man who could not cook or clean was just a grown child, and she did not raise children. She raised men who could stand on their own and contribute to the world around them." "She sounds like a remarkable woman. Is she still alive?" A shadow crossed his face. "No. She died of fever the winter after I came home from the war. My father had passed 2 years before that, so there was nothing left for me back in Virginia. This place became my fresh start, I suppose." Marianne heard the grief in his voice and recognized it. She might never have known parents, but she understood loss and the way it could shape a person's choices. "I am sorry for your loss," she said softly, "but I think she would be proud of what you have built here and of the man you have become." He looked at her with surprise, as if he had not expected such insight from someone he barely knew. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means more than you might realize." They finished the meal in comfortable silence, watching through the window as the sun set behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and purple. Marianne had never seen a sunset like it, wild and free and painted across a canvas so vast it made her feel both insignificant and somehow part of something larger than herself. "I should help you clean up," she said as Jake began clearing the dishes. "Tomorrow," he said firmly. "Tonight you're a guest. Tomorrow, if you decide to stay a while, we can work out a more permanent arrangement." She wanted to protest, but there was something in his tone that suggested arguing would be both futile and unnecessary. Instead, she helped carry the dishes to the kitchen area and then stood awkwardly, uncertain what came next. "I usually sit on the porch for a while after dinner," Jake said, seeming to sense her uncertainty. "Watch the stars come out, listen to the night sounds. You're welcome to join me, or you can retire to your room if you prefer. No expectations either way." The porch was furnished with 2 chairs positioned to take advantage of the view, and Marianne settled into one while Jake took the other. The night air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke and something indefinable that might have been freedom itself. Above them, stars began to appear in a sky so clear and dark that she could see the ghostly sweep of the Milky Way. "I have never seen so many stars," she said softly. "In the city, you can barely see any at all." "One of the things I love about this place," Jake agreed. "Out here, you can see all the way to forever. Makes a person feel both small and infinite at the same time." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the pines, the soft hoot of an owl somewhere in the darkness. Marianne found herself relaxing in ways she had not known were possible, her body releasing tensions she had carried for so long she had forgotten they were there. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said eventually, his voice quiet in the darkness. "Of course. What made you answer Henderson's advertisement? What were you hoping to find out here?" It was a fair question, and one she had asked herself many times during the long journey west. "I suppose I was hoping to find a place where I could belong," she said honestly. "The orphanage was never really home, just a place to exist until I was old enough to leave. I thought perhaps a husband, a home of my own, might give me the sense of belonging I had never found. And instead you found Henderson. Instead I found exactly what I have found everywhere else. Someone who took one look at my face and decided I was not worth knowing." She tried to keep the bitterness out of her voice, but some of it leaked through anyway. "His loss," Jake said simply. "His tremendous loss." The words were spoken so matter-of-factly that they hit her with unexpected force. Not pity, not condescension, just a simple statement of truth as he saw it. She felt tears prick at her eyes and was grateful for the darkness that hid them. "You do not have to say that," she whispered. "I never say things I do not mean," he replied. "Life is too short for pretty lies. Henderson is a fool who judges books by their covers and misses all the good stories. His loss, my gain. Your gain." Even in the darkness, she could hear the smile in his voice. "I get the pleasure of your company, the help of someone willing to work, and the satisfaction of knowing I did the right thing when it mattered. Seems like I came out ahead in this deal." They talked for another hour about inconsequential things, the kind of conversation that people have when they are testing the waters of potential friendship. Jake told her about the ranch, about the cattle and horses, about the challenges of making a living from the land. She found herself telling him about her life at the orphanage, about the small kindnesses that had sustained her and the dreams that had kept her going through the worst times. "I should let you get some rest," Jake said finally as the moon climbed high enough to silver the meadows with its light. "Tomorrow we can talk about what kind of work you might like to do around here, if you decide to stay for a while." "I would like to stay," she said, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. "If you truly meant the offer, I would like to stay and help however I can." "I meant it," he assured her. "Welcome to the Circle M Ranch, Marianne. I have a feeling you're going to fit in just fine." As she prepared for bed in the small, perfect room, Marianne felt something she had never experienced before, hope that was not shadowed by fear. For the first time in her life, someone had looked at her and seen potential instead of problems, worth instead of flaws. It might not last forever, she knew that, but for now it was enough to fall asleep to the sound of wind in the pines and the distant call of a night bird singing in the darkness. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost painting the meadows silver and the mountains standing sharp and clean against a sky the color of sapphires. Marianne woke to the sound of Jake moving around in the kitchen, and the smell of coffee and bacon drew her from her warm bed faster than any alarm clock could have. She dressed quickly and emerged to find him standing at the stove, his hair still tousled from sleep, humming softly to himself as he cooked. There was something deeply appealing about the domestic scene, about the way he moved with easy competence in his own space, completely comfortable with himself and his surroundings. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned with a smile that was becoming familiar and welcome. "Morning. I hope you slept well. The mountains can take some getting used to for city folks, all that quiet and clean air." "I slept better than I have in months," she said honestly. "The quiet was wonderful." "Good. I was hoping the altitude would not bother you. Some people have trouble adjusting." He gestured toward the table, which was already set for two. "Breakfast is almost ready. I hope you like eggs and bacon, because that is about the extent of my breakfast repertoire." The meal was simple but satisfying, and Marianne found herself studying Jake's face in the morning light. The scar that had seemed so prominent the day before was barely noticeable now, just another part of a face that was interesting rather than conventionally handsome. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they held depths that spoke of experiences both painful and joyful. When he smiled, which seemed to be often, his whole face transformed. "What?" he asked, catching her looking at him. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I am sorry. I did not mean to stare. It is just that you look so different from what I expected a rancher to look like." "And what did you expect?" She considered the question seriously. "Older, I suppose. More weathered. Perhaps not so well-spoken or refined." She paused, then added honestly, "and certainly not someone who would be kind to a stranger in need." "Well, I am probably more weathered than you think, just not in ways that show on the outside," Jake said with a slight smile. "As for the rest, my mother insisted on education along with everything else. She said a man needed to be able to hold his own in any company, whether it was around a campfire or in a drawing room. She sounds like she was an extraordinary woman." "She was. You would have liked her, I think. She had no patience for people who judged others by appearance, and she had a gift for seeing the best in everyone she met." He finished his coffee and stood. "Speaking of which, are you ready to see what this place has to offer? I thought I would give you a tour, show you around, and we can talk about what kind of work might suit you." The tour began with the barn, a solid structure that smelled of hay and horses and well-oiled leather. Jake introduced her to each of the horses by name, and she was charmed by the way he spoke to them as if they were old friends. The cattle were grazing in distant pastures, but he pointed out the different herds and explained the basics of ranch management with the patience of a born teacher. "It is not an easy life," he said as they walked through the vegetable garden, where late tomatoes still hung heavy on the vine and winter squash sprawled across the ground. "The work is hard, the weather can be brutal, and you are pretty much on your own when things go wrong. But there is something about it that gets into your blood. The freedom, I suppose. The sense that what you accomplish is yours, earned by your own sweat and determination." "It sounds wonderful," Marianne said, and meant it. She had never had the opportunity to work towards something that belonged to her, had never experienced the satisfaction of seeing the fruits of her own labor. "What kind of work did you have in mind for me?" "That depends on what you are comfortable with and what you might enjoy," Jake replied. "The house always needs attention, and I am not much for domestic details. The garden could use someone with a gentler touch than mine. The chickens need tending, and I have been thinking about expanding the flock. Or if you prefer outdoor work, there is always something that needs doing with the livestock or around the property." They spent the morning exploring every corner of the ranch, from the chicken coop where fat hens clucked and scratched to the creek that provided water for the livestock. Everywhere they went, Jake explained the workings of the place with obvious pride and affection. He was not boastful about what he had accomplished, but Marianne could see that he had built something substantial and good from nothing but determination and hard work. "I think I would like to start with the house and garden," she said as they returned to the porch for lunch. "I have some experience with cooking and cleaning from the orphanage, and I have always wanted to try my hand at growing things." "Sounds perfect," Jake agreed. "We can start easy and see how it goes. No pressure to take on more than you are comfortable with." Over the next few days, they fell into a routine that felt as natural as breathing. Marianne took over the cooking and most of the household chores, discovering that she had a genuine talent for creating comfort and order. She found herself humming as she worked, something she had never done before, and she began to understand why people talked about the satisfaction of making a house into a home. The garden became her special province, and she spent hours learning about the plants that grew well in the mountain climate. Jake was a patient teacher, showing her how to harvest the last of the summer vegetables and prepare the beds for winter. Her hands, which had always seemed clumsy and awkward, proved surprisingly adept at the delicate work of tending growing things. But it was the conversations that meant the most to her. As they worked side by side or shared meals, Jake treated her as an equal, someone whose opinions mattered and whose presence was valued. He asked her thoughts on everything from the weather to the best way to preserve vegetables for winter, and he listened to her answers with genuine interest. "You have a gift for this," he said one afternoon as they worked together in the garden, harvesting pumpkins and winter squash. "Look how much better everything looks since you took over. The plants seem happier." Marianne looked around at the neat rows of vegetables, the carefully weeded beds, the late flowers that still bloomed in defiance of the approaching winter. It did look better, she realized. More cared for, more loved. I think I have been waiting my whole life to have something to tend, she said softly. Something that would grow and flourish because of my attention instead of spite it. Jake paused in his work and looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that made her breath catch. You are not what Henderson said you were, he said quietly. You are not hideous or unsuitable or any of the other cruel things people have called you. You are beautiful, Marianne. Beautiful in ways that matter, in ways that last. The words hit her like a physical force, and she felt tears spring to her eyes. You do not have to say that, she whispered. I know what I look like. I have mirrors. Do you? He asked, moving closer. Or do you have reflections of other people's blindness? Because when I look at you, I see someone who is gentle and kind and strong. I see someone who makes everything around her better just by being present. I see someone who has survived cruelty and remained capable of love. That is beautiful, Marianne. That is more beautiful than any face could ever be. She stared at him through her tears, afraid to believe what she was hearing. No one had ever called her beautiful before, not even in kindness. No one had ever looked at her the way Jake was looking at her now, as if she were something precious and rare. Jake, she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. I am not asking you for anything, he said gently. I am not trying to put you in an uncomfortable position or create obligations you do not want. I am simply telling you the truth as I see it, because I think you deserve to hear it from someone who means it. But the truth was that she wanted him to be asking for something. Over the past weeks, as they had worked and talked and shared the quiet intimacy of daily life, she had begun to feel things she had never expected to feel. She had begun to care for him in ways that went far beyond gratitude, had begun to dream of a future that included both of them. What if I wanted there to be obligations? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What if I wanted you to be asking for something? The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and uncertainty. Jake's face cycled through surprise, hope, and something that looked like fear. You do not know what you are asking, he said finally. I am a scarred man living alone on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. I have little to offer a woman except hard work and an uncertain future. And what if that is exactly what I want? She replied, finding courage she had never known she possessed. What if I want someone who sees past surfaces to what lies beneath? What if I want someone who treats me as if I have value, who makes me feel as if I belong somewhere? What if I want you, Jake Morrison, exactly as you are? He stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the war playing out across his features. Want battling with caution, hope fighting with fear of rejection. Are you sure? He asked finally. Are you absolutely certain that this is what you want, and not just gratitude or relief at finding shelter? I am sure, she said, and realized that she was. I am more sure of this than I have ever been of anything in my life. I love you, Jake. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you make me feel when you look at me. I love the life we have been building together these past weeks, and I want to keep building it for as long as you will have me. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. In that case, he said, reaching for her hands, I have something to ask you. Marianne, will you marry me? Will you stay here and help me turn this ranch into a real home? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you how beautiful and precious you are? Yes, she said through her tears. Yes to all of it. Yes to everything. Yes to you. He kissed her then, gently and carefully, as if she were made of something fragile and precious. But she was not fragile, she realized. She was strong enough to have survived a lifetime of rejection and still be capable of love. Strong enough to recognize worth when it was offered and brave enough to claim the happiness she deserved. The wedding was small and simple, held in the parlor of the ranch house with only the minister and his wife as witnesses. Marianne wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Jake had insisted on buying for her in town, and Jake wore his best suit with a wildflower boutonniere she had picked that morning. They spoke their vows as the autumn sun streamed through the windows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever challenges the future might bring. You are the most beautiful bride I have ever seen, Jake whispered as they exchanged rings, and for the first time in her life, Marianne believed such words were true. The townspeople had talked, of course, when news of their engagement spread. Some whispered about the strange woman who had been rejected by Thomas Henderson. Others speculated about Jake Morrison's reasons for marrying someone so obviously unsuitable. But their gossip had no power to hurt her anymore, because she finally understood the difference between the opinions of small minds and the love of someone who truly saw her. As winter settled over the mountains and they spent long evenings by the fire planning for spring, Marianne sometimes thought about the girl who had stepped off the train months ago, desperate and convinced of her own worthlessness. That girl had been transformed not by magic or miracles, but by the simple power of being seen and valued for who she truly was. The ranch prospered under their joint care, becoming the kind of place where neighbors were always welcome and travelers could count on a warm meal and a safe place to rest. Marianne's garden became legendary in the valley, and her preserves and pickles were sought after by everyone who tasted them. But more than that, the ranch became a place of healing, where people who had been broken by the world could find acceptance and the chance to start again. Years later, when people asked how she had found such happiness after such a difficult beginning, Marianne would smile and look out at the mountains that had become her home. I learned that beauty is not about what people see when they look at you, she would say. It is about what you see when you look at yourself through the eyes of someone who loves you truly. And once you know that kind of love, once you really know it, nothing else matters very much at all. The birthmark was still there, of course, a splash of wine-colored skin that would never fade. But it had become simply part of her face, no more significant than the color of her eyes or the shape of her smile. In Jake's eyes, in the mirror of his love, she had finally seen herself as she truly was, not hideous, but human, not worthless, but precious, not alone, but deeply, completely, permanently beloved. And on quiet evenings when they sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge in the endless sky, Mary Ann would sometimes think about the courage it had taken to step off that train into an uncertain future. She was grateful now for Thomas Henderson's rejection, grateful for every cruel word and dismissive glance that had led her to this moment, this place, this love that had transformed everything she thought she knew about herself and what was possible in the world. They called her hideous once, but they had been wrong about everything that mattered. Beauty, she had learned, was not about meeting someone else's standards. It was about finding someone who helped you see the truth of your own worth, and having the courage to believe what love revealed. Thanks for joining us on this journey of discovery and transformation. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that true beauty shines from within, and that the right person will always see past the surface to the treasure underneath.